My name is David Paige. I am an attorney. I'm the managing director of a company called Legal Fee Advisors. What we do and what I do is we advise companies on various strategies on ways to reduce outside legal spend. So a little bit about my background. Here's how I started out in all this. I actually started out as a special ed teacher. That helps get me ready for what I'm about to do here, okay? The other thing that helps is I spent 2 years at Berkeley in a psychology program for PhD. That helps me for this, okay? Then I went to law school. That doesn't help me that much for this, okay? But after that, I ran law firms for almost 20 years. I litigated, and I was the recipient. I actually produced legal bills for large corporations, and I was the recipient of legal billing audits. Now, as the recipient of legal billing audits at that part of my career, that was not a happy thing. I never felt they were fair. Well, sometimes I felt they were fair. Mostly I didn't think they were fair. I always felt that they didn't really look at the value of what I did. So after going through a lot of different things in my career, I was the COO of a company for a while, I was the general counsel of another company for a little while, I decided it was time to do something about all this. So as my daughters might say to me, is that, why did you do this, Dad? And I said, well, I was a special ed teacher. Why not? So essentially, here's what we're going to do today. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at some really basic stuff in this field. I have worked with national banks. I've worked with international banks. I've worked with pharmaceutical companies. We do not sell software. We sell concepts. The idea is, how do we make this fair? How do we make it efficient? How do we apply best practices of other companies? So let's look at what's going to happen here. I'm going to first talk about a combination of two basic ideas. These basic ideas are the two things that most people tell me are important to them when they buy legal services. The first thing is, what analysis is there of the overall value? I hear this from lawyers constantly. I want someone to value what I do. What did I produce? Is that worth the money? And the second thing that I hear from some clients is that, are there best practice controls? Do I actually know what happened? Can I measure what happened? Are there efficiencies? A friend of mine who I used to practice law with, who was in the Navy, used to say two things to me. He said it all day, so I remember it. He was great with this. He said, trust but verify. Okay, that was one thing he said. And the other, he was a midshipman. He said, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. So I guess some people here might have heard that at one time or two. So here's the basic idea here. How, on the one hand, do you take the concept that is extremely reasonable? Are your law firms giving you fair value in the entire transaction, in the entire litigation? Are they giving you that? And can you measure it? And is it efficient? That is the conundrum. And the reason I'm standing here today with you is because what our company does and what I do is help people figure out how to deal with this. So what do we mean by this? Oh, and then I'm going to talk about some billing problems, talk about some solutions, and then 6 action items, because that's what I promised to do here today. Here's what I'm not going to be able to do. I'm not going to be able to go very deeply into what some people call alternative fee arrangements and how they work and how they don't work and the different species of them. You know, it's kind of like a restaurant menu. Some of us have gone into these restaurants where when you say you have chicken and you hear 10 minutes worth of description about the chicken, and you know where it was raised, and you know what herbs are on it, and you know if they sprinkled something on it. I can't do that here because I don't have the time. What I can do is tell you what basically is on the menu of the companies that actually do a great job with this. We have studied them, we have worked with them, and we know what they do. So we're going to give you a very high-level overview of some of these strategies today. So that's where we're going, and that's what we're doing. So this is, I hope everybody can see this. One of my colleagues told me that green isn't working well out there. I hope you can see it. And I apologize if you can't. We like green. I know, I'm sorry, okay? So anyway, the concept is, from 30,000 feet, what's the value of the legal transaction to the company? Is it worth it? Literally, is it worth it? And I talk to people about this all the time. I know that's a crazy way to use your time, but I do. And here's what they say. Some law firms say, and they say it very loudly, they say, David, here's the deal. My clients love me, I love them, they trust me, and we don't need any of your stuff. And I say, great, you guys are doing great. You don't need anything. And other people say, we need to have systems. We need to have e-billing systems, matter management systems. We need to watch things like a hawk because there is essentially, on some level, a lack of trust, I guess, or they want accountability. I think the best is both. That's me. I think when you have a philosophy whereby you value a result and what you're paying for the result, and you put that together with monitoring for efficiency, let's say. In other words, you have rules and guidelines that make sense to people. You have workflows that are best practice workflows for that kind of work. I know I'm not the only one saying this today. You have project management protocols that firms use so they work step by step by step. You have predictability on pricing, right? Because you have budgets, you have your monitoring plans, you know what's going to happen to some extent. And then if you have to look back later and you say to a third party, hey, this part of your business, you guys now have to pay for this litigation. One or two people in this room have to make that case once in a while, I think. In other words, this part of the business, you guys have to pay for the litigation. You have to pay for the transaction. Here's how it happened. Here is the budget. Here is the plan. Here's what went on. So if you have both, you've got the best. That's my point. That's what I'm trying to say. That's very hard to do. Because if you're putting together billing rules, some people will say, these rules are ridiculous. They're too rigid. They're crazy. What do you mean only one lawyer can go to something, can go to a hearing or something? Do you know how complicated this is? Okay. You have a way in the rule to change that, to have written permission to do something else. Or maybe you have a litigation plan. That's how you do it. Or maybe someone says, these rules are too complex. There's one major company we've dealt with that has rules that are more than 100 pages long. And when I say the name of that company to a lawyer, they say to me, oh my God, I can't believe I have to deal with that. Other companies have no rules at all. There's no rules in the house. So, and think about the inherent unfairness of this. If there were no rules at all, you could potentially have one company over here with one in-house lawyer who goes to court with 8 lawyers. No one questions. And over here, they're saying, oh my God, it's not fair. I have to go alone. See, somewhere between those two is reality. Somewhere between those two is reasonableness. And so my point is, I think you need some kind of rules. You need exceptions that are common sense to the rules. And you need to be able to keep a record. When you can keep a record, you can show a third party, here's what we did, and here's why we did it. That's my point. So here are some of the typical legal billing issues. Incidentally, I hope we have lots of time for questions at the end. Because if we have questions at the end, then I can do something that my kids always tell me I have to do. Shut up and listen and let people say things, Dad, okay? So that's going to be important, okay, at the end of this thing. Here's what a lot of people experience. And I want to say something before I go on. There are people in this room who have done a lot of thinking about this. Their companies have very sophisticated systems that deal with legal spend. There are others in the room who have almost no systems, or systems they don't like. I had to design this to go to the treetops. So for those of you who this is old hat for, I apologize. For those of you who is not old hat for, I hope you get something out of it. Just wanted to say that as I'm going through. So here's a challenge. Here's one type of situation. Inefficiency, lack of transparency. What does that mean? You read the bills, you can't tell what happened. Nobody knows. How do you have prepare for trial 15 days in a row? That doesn't help you, unless you don't care.
inconsistent monitoring in hourly law firm billing. I have that down there because I'm not dealing with flat fees today. I don't have the time to do that today. So 75 to 80% of law spend is still hourly, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think it's reasonable or not. That's still the way it goes. So if you have inconsistent monitoring, how does that happen? What I am told, and I'll give you an example of a client of mine, a very, very well-known web client came to me years ago and said, look, we have no time. We're growing like crazy. There are 7 people in our legal department. A couple of years ago, we spent $5 million on outside legal spend. This year, we're going to spend $27 million. And it's because we're growing like crazy. We're international. It's nuts. We need help because we don't have the time to read the bills. Another story. I was at a major software company a few weeks ago, one of the largest in the world. They have thought about this forever and ever. I said, and they have one of the most sophisticated e-billing systems that's imaginable. I mean, this thing is a work of art. It's gorgeous. If it were a car, it would be a Lamborghini. It would be red, black upholstery, right? Yes, you agree? Yes, okay. See, he's with me. All right, there you go. It was gorgeous. Guess what? They don't have time to read the stuff in the system. They can't read it. So they got all this data, and they can't use it for anything. So he said to me, David, maybe your people could read it and create executive summaries for us. I said, fine, okay. So what are the issues then in this area? If someone doesn't read, remember, inspect and verify, if no one's reading, then why are you doing it in the first place? What can you do? We think, us, do a checkup. Take a look at what works and what doesn't work. This field is filled with tools, toolboxes. So Grady billing system, it's a tool. Monitoring in a common sense way, that's a tool. Saying to law firms, and there might be 1 or 2 in the room, you're a stakeholder, you shouldn't be left out of the process of figuring out how this works. Come into the process. And guess what? Later on, it's hard for them to complain. Bring them into the process. So that's all part of it. If you can establish a baseline at that point and say, look, if you had these rules in place and these concepts in place, your spend would be better. Now, let me just throw one more thing on top of that. I haven't talked about rate. And the reason I haven't talked about rate is I have a very strange philosophy. I think a lawyer should get whatever rate they can negotiate. I did that for a long time. If they're that good, they should get paid. However, they don't have a right to be inefficient. In other words, if you have a great lawyer and you're paying that great lawyer, they don't have a right to have 18 people go with them to a meeting because it makes them feel good. That's not fair. Even though they're a great lawyer, it's still not fair. So I'm not talking about rate here. I'm not talking about discounts. Look, I was brought up in New York. Someone tells me they're giving me a discount. I say, you're giving me a discount? No, you're not giving me a discount. This is what you wanted to be paid before. Now, some people here might think discounts are great. I'm from New York. Don't talk to me about discounts. So the rate is the rate. If somebody can pay you that, I'm going to applaud you all day. You don't have the right to be inefficient. You don't have a right not to be transparent so that I know what you were doing all day. That's what that's about. Next piece, confusing billing guidelines and lack of law firm buy-in. We talked about the buy-in a minute ago. They're a stakeholder. And then bill auditing that's painful. All right. I did something the other day which some people thought was crazy. I went on into a LinkedIn group that talks about this kind of thing, like billing. Believe me, there's a LinkedIn group for everything, okay? And there's a couple of thousand people in the group, right? So here was the question I asked to everybody. I said, does law firm auditing help or hurt corporate relationships? If I could have had holes drilled in me by some of the people who wrote in on that, it was astonishing. And I shouldn't have been astonished by it, Many of the lawyers said, don't you know how much this hurts? I said, okay. And then I had people from the corporate side say, yeah, but we can't trust these guys. We've got to have the rules. And we've got to have the auditors. And we've got to have the monitoring. And at the end of the day, I said, you know, they're both right. There are times when the monitoring is awful. There are some people, unfortunately, in the auditing field, and we are part of that auditing field to some extent in our company, that do a bad job. They pick and they pick and they pick and they pick. And the lawyers who are subject to it, they see an audit and they groan, and then they're not working and they're dealing with the audit. Good auditing, and it does exist, is almost invisible. All they're looking for are people who are significantly out of compliance and try to get them to fix it, and it's over with. That's good auditing. So counterproductive auditing is bad. We need to get law firms to buy into the process and say, look, guys, we need transparency because this is corporate governance. The days of just doing things on a one-line bill for services rendered, this much money, don't you love me? Yes, I love you. Over. Over. I still see bills like that once in a while, but not much. And I had a talk like this last fall in Amsterdam to a version of this crowd that was European. And they looked at me, and about this point, they were pretty much nodding, and they were also pretty scared by some of it, too. But the point I guess I'm making is the transparency, if transparency is valued here, some of you may know that transparency is valued a degree or two more there. And some of the people in this room deal with legal fees all through the world. So that's something to think about. Here's a really important part of this. Some companies lack an understanding of how a combination of all the tools out there can actually make things better. And this is something that many of us have encountered in even very large corporations. They actually will say, okay, we have an incredible e-billing system. That's going to make the cost go down. And then it doesn't. I had one client that was a major international bank that had an e-billing system and guidelines. And it didn't work very well because they never enforced the guidelines. Not once. They never went back to one law firm and said, I don't like that bill. So the law firms did whatever they wanted to do. I mean, I didn't have to go be a special ed teacher to figure that one out. I was a father. I knew that. Okay. That was enough for that. All we did was get the law firms in, agree to have them re-sign on the billing standards and the concepts. And you know what? Their bills the next year went down 35%. We didn't even touch rate. All because we just had to mean it. And I learned that being a dad. Okay, I didn't need anything else. The combination of tools is what makes this work. And that's so important in the end. Here's one process. This is a process that we use. It's a process some other people use. And it's not that complicated. Some of you will see that some parts of this process are not really about technology. They're about people. They're about the way people think. And the thing that is so hard for some people when they hear a guy like me talk is it's really about being fair. It's about being transparent. It's about using workflows that make sense for legal work. Right? I mean, who would argue with that? It's about being efficient. So instead of, for example, a law firm doing all their e-discovery work in-house at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour, maybe it goes out. That sounds like a no-brainer. I see those bills all day where the e-discovery is actually being done in-house. All right, so we analyze, we take a look. What's wrong with this picture? What is going wrong here? Sometimes we will find something like, why are you paying lawyers full price to go on airplanes overnight and they're sleeping and they're charging you like they're working? And they go, oh, do they do that? Yeah, they do. How much is that worth? Well, it was worth $1 million last year. Oh, really? So it's small things sometimes. Next, revise. Get the guidelines to be very, very fair, put workflow processes in, put other processes in that make the law firm say, you know what, this makes sense, this is good. And in a breakfast this morning with some other speakers who were all very interesting people, one of the things that I heard is that there are some law firms that really don't like all this. And I knew that already, of course. And some of those law firms, it's because they think that they're so valuable that people should just pay them, and if they want to read their bills, they're not a good client. And what I am told by many of the inside counsel who I work with is that I guess they're forced to use those firms sometimes, but a lot of other times they're not. They do have alternatives. And from what I'm seeing, having been doing this for quite some time, is that the tide is really moving toward this type of model. Change management. Take those revised standards, get them into your corporate culture. And when I say the corporate culture, I mean inside your company. Some people are not going to like changing the way they deal with their law firms. They just won't. You already know that. I did this entire process inside one of the top 5 banks in the United States. It took a year. The law firms weren't the problem. Inside was the problem. They didn't want to change the way they dealt with their law firms. But eventually it worked. We had 117 law firms that signed on to all the change, and the billing became more efficient by 23% the next year and leveled out. So it works. The last is you do have to inspect to some extent. Not to make the law firms crazy, but inspect to make sure you're at least getting what you thought you were getting. And if one of the parts of your company says, why did you spend so much on that? Or what do we reserve for that? You can tell them. You can show them. It's right there. So, I'm sorry. Oh, I thought I heard somebody. Okay. How am I doing? Oh, I'm doing really well. Okay, this is great. Okay. So, these are the 6 things. Some of them I've talked a little bit about before. I just want to really hit them home. Incidentally, I created this thing so that I could even be done early, possibly. I know that that's a bad thing for a speaker. I know it's impossible. I shouldn't be doing that, okay? But I thought, why not? Why not try? Why not? Lily thinks it's good, right? Yeah, okay. And we'll have time for questions. And even the lawyers in the room who don't like me can ask questions. Anybody can ask questions. Okay. So, obtain the measurement. Are the systems working? When I talk to people many times, I don't talk about what we do. I say, what's bothering you? What's bothering you about how you're spending your money? Are you happy or are you not happy? If you're happy, then we have a drink. I like a certain type of gin. It's fantastic, okay? If you're not happy, let's talk about if either we can help you or some of the people who are our partners can help you, who do things like project management protocols for lawyers, who are great e-discovery providers, whatever, okay? Help you. Could we do better while preserving law firm relationships? Sometimes, and I heard this actually in the software company out west, they said to me, we can't have law firm auditors. I said, why? Because we had a law firm auditing firm in here, and they picked at the bills to the point where the law firms hated us all day. And I said, that's terrible. That's awful. But here's an analogy. I use food analogies when it gets late, and I still am on New York Times, so I'm kind of hungry, okay? So, you know, it used to be in New York, I'm going to name it's New York again. It used to be in New York, you couldn't get moussaka that was any good. Moussaka is like a Greek thing. You know, it's really good. Bless you. Bless you a lot. Okay. It wasn't, and I thought, oh, God, who could eat that stuff? It was bad. But what I didn't realize, I was having diner moussaka, okay? If you go to a good Greek restaurant, it's really good, okay? And so what I said to him is, you've been eating diner moussaka. You know, the auditing you've been getting is bad auditing. Not all moussaka is diner moussaka, and not all auditing is bad auditing. You can't have auditing that's invisible, pretty much. It just points out issues with law firms and solves them, okay? So, survey solutions. What works the best for your company culture? I'll give you an example of this one. There are some companies that all they want to do is measure. They just want to know, how are the law firms doing? Are they compliant? Are they not compliant? That's the whole deal. There are other companies that say, I want to save money. The law firms have to get into line. Give you an example. One of the things, I know some of you hate this thing, is no block billing. A block bill, for some of you who don't know what that means, is when you string together things like read email, thought about email, took a walk, talked to so-and-so about the email, thought again about the email, wrote a memo about the email, you know, blah, 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 on and on and on and on. 8 hours. A lot of companies don't like block bills. And so I was sitting with one of my clients, and this was a very impetuous man, many years younger than I am. And I said to him, what do you want to do about block billing? And he said, oh, I don't care about block billing. I said, what do you mean? He said, I see a block bill. Just put a line through it. Don't pay them. They won't do it anymore. Okay. That's good. So, look, his kids were probably pretty good kids. I don't know. But anyway, so the point is sometimes you can overthink this stuff, too. You know, you can go too far in it. What was the point of the block billing concept? Because you want to understand what people did. You don't want all that stuff strung together. Is it the biggest deal in the world? No. What's a bigger deal? Well, if you take, many law firms will talk about rate. And they'll say, well, here's the rate. Here's what we're going to do for you here. Here's what we're going to get paid. And when they talk to me about it, I say, well, that's great. How many lawyers get to go to a deposition? And they'll say, I don't know. I'll say, well, let's look. Oh, 5 got to go. Why do you care about the rate? You just got killed. In other words, the lack of efficiency killed you. Or I'll say to you, okay, you have this kind of transaction. I have one company that we work with that has to obtain mining permits. All over the United States, they mine this material. It's very valuable, okay? And I said, so, who's your most efficient firm on this? Well, there are these guys over here. How much do they charge? Well, they charge that much. Who's your least efficient? They're over here. How much do they charge? That much. Why aren't you using the workflow from number 1? Why aren't you? They're doing something better. Why aren't you doing it that way? So the point I'm getting at is if you think about the value, you think about these efficiencies, you bring your counsel into the process and say to them, guess what, law firm number 1? You are the star. You're the efficient law firm. You're getting the best stuff from now on. I believe it will make them happy. I do. And that is a way to go. Before I came in here, I had someone come over who was talking to me about this, who told me about a woman who was at a very, very prominent web company who said, look, everybody in the audience, I want to tell you something. Love your law firms, love them back, but have great workflows. And make them stay with the workflows. You'll be fine. That's one fantastic approach. So bring them in, get their ideas, implement, and retain flexibility. Here's the thing that I know, and anyone in here who has ever, I have 2 girls, anyone who's ever brought up kids knows this. You got to be flexible. Because in the end, you have to change for circumstances to make things work. That's important too. I see too many companies that have rigid rules that felt good when they did them. Then they don't enforce them, and they wonder why they have no compliance. It's because they're unenforceable rules, basically. They were badly constructed in the first place. Bill monitoring should be fair and reasonable. For those of you in the room who will never talk to me again, and I don't blame you, okay? For those of you in the room who feel that way, please do that. If you are using inside monitors, meaning if you're using lawyers inside your company to monitor, be honest. Are they all really reading the bills? If they're not all reading the bills, isn't it unfair for the people who are reading them and taking things off of the others who aren't? Inconsistency is unfair to everybody. If it's being done outside, is it being done with a good head? There are some firms out there who audit bills with people who are outside the United States. I don't like that so much. That's me, you know. Can you make more money that way? Sure. I don't like it. I like doing it with people who understand something about the legal process. I think it's better. So the point is, it should be fair, it should be reasonable, and it should be non-invasive. And the last part, you can see I did a thing over here. I did not put the thing in there. I'm not great on this PowerPoint stuff, sorry. Predictability. Everybody in this room has a budget. Everybody in this room has to justify to somebody what they spend. Anyone who doesn't, congratulations. Okay, I don't know many people like that. If you want predictability, you need budgeting protocols. You need estimates. They don't have to be rigid estimates, but they have to be something. So you see here, we have all of these strategies. We have all of these concepts. It's blinding, really. One of the things that some people do well is put them all together. In the end, if you have a value proposition and your lawyers agree, and you have metrics you can work with, now you've really got something. So, how did I do? Wow, I did great. All right. I guess if anyone has a question or a comment or whatever, we can do that. Oh, incidentally, before I end, I do have two colleagues in the room. I have Beth Palpick sitting right here, and formerly of J.P. Morgan, who is now working with me. And I have Ronnie Rosenberg sitting back there, formerly with the American International Group. She works with me too. So just wanted you to know they were here. Any questions, comments? Can't throw things, sorry. Yes?